We're getting a feel for the little history.
Yes.
Can you share with us a little brief history of physical therapy from your perspective?
So at that time when I went into physical therapy, it was again the idea that you might help people that were sort of paralyzed. And I really thought I didn't need to know that much, just not enough to be dangerous. And in many ways, when I got my first job, I sort of felt like a medical cheerleader. Like, come on, you can do it, let's take a step, I'm going to help you, etc. I didn't feel like I had to figure out anything. I just had to help people be strong enough to help pick them up and carry them along. And at that time, too, the polio vaccine had been introduced. And so we were beginning to lose the polio patient, but we were getting more, they were saving the lives of the head injured and the spinal cord injured. Before this, those people just died. So it was very much a neurological population of people. But what was really tricky for me is because these head injured, spinal cord injured stroke patients had upper motor neuron problems, central nervous system problems, and the polio patient had a lower motor neuron problem. That we've got caught in this transition between how do you treat the polio patient differently than you treat the neurological central nervous system lesion patient. And with the polio patient, it was all about stretching muscles. It was all about getting muscles to respond again. And so we did resistive exercise and muscle re-education. But with a neurological patient, we were supposed to not stretch a muscle because we'd make the spasticity worse. We were not to strengthen them because it would make their spastic muscles stronger. So it was a real problem of, I don't understand what I'm doing because it doesn't apply to this patient. It doesn't seem to what I did for that other patient.
Sure.
So we were caught in a real transition at that time as to what do I really do. But because I'm so smart, after 9 years, I decided I really don't know what I'm doing. But I'm a little slow on the uptake. So I was very lucky because patients would stay in the hospital forever. I mean, they stay there a long time. So I got to watch how people worked, and I was trying to figure out what was happening with these patients. And it didn't matter what I tried, I didn't understand it. So I decided that the only way to deal with this situation is to escape by going to graduate school.
Escape.
So then I didn't have to know what I was doing. I could go to graduate school and try and figure out what I was doing.
Sounds good.
So that's what I did 9 years later.
Wow. Now, I understand that you used to do research, recording from the motor cortex of monkeys. What led you to shift from the neurology area into now orthopedics? Right? I'd love for people to know the origin story of MSI.
Okay, so because again I was so smart, it only took me 7 years to get my PhD. And at that time, my PhD work was looking actually at cats and motor patterns. And then when I graduated, I've always been, like, the thing that has been so fortuitous for me, I've always been in the right place at the right time. And that's really the truth. So just to back up for a minute, when I decided I needed to go to graduate school, they were just starting this PhD program in neurobiology. And so I just went to the person that was in charge of that program and I said, I want to go to graduate school. He didn't look at my academic record. He just said, you need to find an advisor. Okay. And so to get the real story, so I had a fourth cousin who was 16 years old and had a stroke. I was working with him, and his neurologist argued with me about how I should manage my cousin. And so we had this argument. And my cousin did really well. Now I know it was luck, not me. But the neurologist was so impressed that I had argued with him about his stroke, because he loved to argue. So when I wanted an advisor, I went to this neurologist. And he had just been to a big conference where the Bobass and the Brunstroms and all that were trying to explain how to treat neurological patients, and he said they were just full of nonsense. So when I went to say, I want to work with you, he said, well, somebody's got to straighten you physical therapist out. So he took me on as a graduate student.
And what is the name of this neurologist?
His name is William Landau.
Yes.
And and as fate would have it, his major research assistant was a woman that had been a physical therapist.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. So she said, oh, I'll be happy to help you.
Okay.
So he turned me over to her, and we spent 7 years. I always like to tell the story. I had such severe cerebral atrophy because I had been out of school for 9 years. But they were very patient with me. And as it turned out, I did fairly well. And I got I got my PhD in neurobiology. And then I was so lucky that Bill Landau hired me because they were looking for someone to teach the basic sciences to OTs and PTs. Mm-hmm. So I got that job. And so I was half-time in PT, OT, and I was half-time in the Department of Neurology. Oh, wow. And Bill Landau, this neurologist, always was interested in the upper motor neuron syndrome, as was I. What is the disordered motor control of people with central nervous system lesions? Sure. So that's why we did the monkey business.
The monkey business.
It was a monkey
yes,
business.
The infamous monkey business.
So we got monkeys, and we trained them to do tasks with their foot. Okay. And while they did those tasks, we recorded from their motor cortex. Believe it or not, I spent 19 years training monkeys. That's
a long time.
Yes, it was. And I'm not sure that I got any better when I started working with people again. So the monkeys did this task, and then what we would record from their motor cortex, and then we would put a lesion in their pyramidal tract to see how they reorganized themselves. I did not push back any frontiers of ignorance with that. But I was learning a whole lot about the nervous system. And so that learning about the nervous system, my previous experience for 9 years working with neurological patients, and then I'd always had this overriding interest in why do people move the way they move? For example, how can you recognize somebody at a distance by how they move before you see their face? We studied normal gait. And if everybody had a normal gait, it ought to look the same. But people don't look the same. And then you make impressions about people based on how they move. Sure. And so I wanted to know sort of like, what is it that make people move the way they move? The other thing is, when I was seeing patients, I could never understand why some people who would run marathons had no calluses on the bottom of their feet, and other people had so many calluses, I don't know how they got their shoes on. I'm serious. So what were these differences in people in the way they moved if there was sort of a normal way to do things? So sort of so I was always observing people, trying to put the pieces together. And then when Steve Rose came to Washington University to be director of the physical therapy service, he asked me to take a look at patients that had back pain and musculoskeletal pain with them. And I kind of saw that they weren't moving right. And in those days, that if you had a patient with musculoskeletal pain, you were supposed to stretch muscles and strengthen muscles. But since I didn't think they were moving right, I just started having them move differently. And I did the same exam on them that I did on my patients with stroke. Okay. And they got better. And I didn't know why. So that sort of led me on to redo part of what I had learned from muscle testing, muscle length assessment, the putting people in quadruped was a big part of the treatment of neurological patients at the time, because we thought we were retraining the brain.
In quadruped.
In quadruped, because we were taking them through their developmental sequence again.
I see.
I even then I knew that wasn't true, because their heads were small and their bodies were big, and when you're a baby, your head is big and your body's small. It's not the same. So anyway, I always thought there was something mechanical about it. So I was doing those same tests with people that had musculoskeletal pain, as I say, and I was teaching them how to walk differently, teaching them how to move, and they got better. So that led me on to trying to do a very specific test to look at muscle length, etc., to see how that played into these movement patterns.
Okay.
So that's how the MSI business got started.
Fantastic.
I know.
Fantastic.